The night was cold and quiet, with only the faint hum of distant traffic breaking the silence. Officer Daniel Harper adjusted his jacket as he walked along the deserted streets of Maplewood, a small town known for its close-knit community and picturesque charm. It wasn't often that trouble found its way here, but tonight felt different, somehow heavier. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating alleys and shadows as he made his rounds. Daniel had been on the force for over 15 years, and while most people saw him as just another officer in uniform, those who knew him well understood there was more to him than met the eye. He carried a deep sense of responsibility, not just to uphold the law, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That's why, when something caught his attention near the back of an old diner, he didn't hesitate to investigate. Behind, the diner trash bins were stacked haphazardly, their contents spilling onto the cracked pavement. At first glance, it seemed like nothing out of the ordinary. But then, a soft sound reached Daniel's ears, a whimper so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. Frowning, he stepped closer, shining his flashlight into the narrow space between two dumpsters. What he saw next stopped him in his tracks. Crouched, inside one of the bins was a boy, no older than 10, shivering uncontrollably. His clothes were tattered and covered in dirt, barely shielding him from the biting cold. The boy's wide, frightened eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel noticed how thin the child was, his ribs visible even under the oversized sweater he wore. It was clear he hadn't eaten in days. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly, kneeling down to appear less intimidating. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was calm, filled with genuine concern. Still, the boy flinched, clutching a piece of discarded cardboard tightly against his chest as if it were a shield. Daniel took a cautious step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "What's your name?" he asked gently, trying to ease the tension. When the boy didn't respond, Daniel glanced around, searching for any clues about what might have brought him here. There were no signs of family or belongings, just the boy in the grimy confines of the dumpster. Reaching into his pocket, Daniel pulled out a granola bar he kept for emergencies. "I've got this," he said, holding it out toward the boy. "It's yours if you want it." For a long moment the boy hesitated, his hunger warring with his fear. Finally, trembling fingers reached out and snatched the bar before retreating. Quickly, Daniel watched as the boy tore open the wrapper and began eating ravenously, crumbs falling onto his lap. As the boy ate, Daniel couldn't shake the sinking feeling in his gut. How had this child ended up alone in such a desperate state? Who would abandon him like this? These questions swirled in his mind, but he pushed them aside for now. Right now, all that mattered was making sure the boy was safe. "You don't have to say anything yet," Daniel reassured him, his tone warm and steady. "But let's get you somewhere warm, okay? Somewhere safe." The boy looked up at him, tears glistening in his weary eyes. Though he didn't speak, his expression conveyed a mix of gratitude and disbelief, as though he couldn't quite believe someone cared enough to help. Little did either of them know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. And so, with gentle encouragement, Daniel extended his hand, ready to guide the boy out of the darkness and into the light. Officer Daniel Harper stood by the dumpster, his heart heavy with a mix of anger and sadness. The boy, still clutching the empty granola bar wrapper, looked up at him warily. Though he had accepted the food, trust was another matter entirely. Daniel knew better than to rush things. Years of experience taught him that fear could be as stubborn as any lock. He crouched down again, leveling his gaze with the boy's sunken eyes. "It's okay," Daniel murmured softly, keeping his voice steady. "I'm here to help you, do you understand me?" The boy blinked but didn't respond. His silence spoke volumes, of pain, neglect, and perhaps even abuse. Daniel noticed how his small frame tensed whenever he moved too quickly or reached out. It broke his heart to see someone so young carrying such visible scars, not just on their body but in their spirit. "Let's start with something simple," Daniel said after a pause. Do you want to come with me? I can take you somewhere warm where we can talk more." For a moment, the boy hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape route. But when he realized there was nowhere else to go, he gave a tiny nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Daniel to feel a flicker of hope. Slowly, he extended his hand once more, careful not to make any sudden movements. This time, the boy hesitated only briefly before placing his trembling fingers into Daniel's palm. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it meant everything. Daniel led the boy to his patrol car, opening the passenger door and helping him inside. The interior smelled faintly of leather and coffee, a stark contrast to the cold, damp air outside. As the warmth from the heater filled the car, the boy huddled against the seat, pulling his knees close to his chest. He stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact as though bracing himself for what might happen next. Daniel climbed into the driver's seat and turned to face him. "You're safe now," he said firmly, yet kindly. "No one's going to hurt you while I'm here. Okay?" The boy nodded again, though his expression remained guarded. Daniel decided not to press him further. Instead, he grabbed a blanket from the back seat and draped it over the boy's shoulders. "Here, this should help keep you warm." As they drove toward the local shelter, Daniel kept stealing glances at the boy. His mind raced with questions. Who was he? Where did he come from? And most importantly, why had no one reported him missing? Every instinct told Daniel that this wasn't just a case of a runaway child. It ran deeper than that. When they arrived at the shelter, a modest building tucked away on the outskirts of town, Daniel parked the car and turned off the engine. Before stepping out, he leaned closer to the boy. "We're here," he said gently. "This place is safe. People will take care of you, but I'll stay with you until you're comfortable. Deal?" The boy looked at him, his dark eyes searching Daniel's face for reassurance. After a long pause, he whispered hoarsely, "Okay." It was the first word he'd spoken since they met, and it sent a jolt through Daniel. Hearing the boy's voice, soft and fragile, made the reality of the situation hit harder. Whoever this child was, he deserved so much more than the life he'd been living. Inside the shelter, the staff greeted them warmly, offering hot cocoa and clean clothes. The boy clung to Daniel like a lifeline, unwilling to let him out of sight. Daniel stayed by his side, speaking softly to reassure him every step of the way. By the time the boy was settled in a cozy chair with a steaming mug in his hands, a social worker approached Daniel. Her name was Sarah, and her kind smile put people at ease instantly. She introduced herself to the boy, who responded with a shy nod. "We'll do everything we can to help him," Sarah assured Daniel, "but we need to figure out who he is and where he came from. Any idea how long he's been out there?" Daniel shook his head, frustration etched across his face. "Not yet, but I plan to find out." As Sarah began asking gentle questions, Daniel stepped aside, watching from a distance. For now, all he could do was ensure the boy felt safe. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Something about the boy's story tugged at his soul, urging him to dig deeper and uncover the truth behind the shadows that haunted him. The shelter's warm lights cast a soft glow over the room, creating an atmosphere of calm that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in Officer Daniel Harper's mind. The boy, still unnamed, sat quietly in the corner, wrapped in the blanket Daniel had given him earlier. He sipped his hot cocoa slowly, as though unsure whether it was safe to enjoy something so simple yet comforting. Sarah, the social worker, knelt beside him, her voice gentle and patient as she tried to coax more information from him. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked softly, her smile unwavering despite the boy's silence. For a long moment he stared at her, his wide eyes filled with uncertainty. Then, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "Eli." Sarah exchanged a glance with Daniel, who stood nearby, leaning against the wall. Hearing the boy's name felt like a small victory, a crack in the armor of fear he had built around himself. "Well, Eli," Sarah continued, her tone light and encouraging, "we're really glad you're here. Do You remember where you lived before tonight? Or who takes care of you? Eli's grip on the mug tightened, and his gaze dropped to the floor. His lips pressed together in a tight line, refusing to answer. Daniel could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the conflict between wanting to trust these strangers and fearing what might happen if he did. Sarah didn't push further. Instead, she changed tactics. Do you have any family nearby? Maybe someone we can call to let them know you're safe? At this, Eli's reaction was immediate and telling. His body stiffened and his breathing quickened slightly. Though he didn't speak, the tension radiating from him said everything. Whatever or whoever he had left behind, it wasn't a place he wanted to return to. Daniel stepped forward then, crouching down beside Eli. Hey, buddy, he said gently, his voice low and reassuring. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to right now. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I'll make sure you're taken care of, okay? Eli looked up at him, his dark eyes searching Daniel's face for sincerity. After a moment, he gave the tiniest nod, though his expression remained guarded. As Sarah continued her assessment, jotting notes onto a clipboard, Daniel excused himself to step outside. The cool night air hit him like a wave, clearing his thoughts, momentarily. He pulled out his phone and dialed the station, asking one of his colleagues to run a search for missing children reports in the area. Given Eli's age and appearance, it seemed impossible that no one had noticed he was gone. Yet so far there were no matches. When Daniel returned to the shelter, Sarah approached him with a concerned look. He won't say much about his past, she admitted quietly. But based on his condition, malnourished, unattended wounds, signs of prolonged neglect, I'd say he's been living rough for weeks, maybe even months. Daniel nodded grimly. And whatever home he came from, it doesn't sound like it was a good one. Sarah hesitated before speaking again. There's something else. When I mentioned calling his family, he became visibly upset. It makes me wonder, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Abuse cases were always difficult, but when they involved children, they cut deeper than anything else. We need to tread carefully, he said finally. If he's scared of going back, we can't force him. Not until we know more. Back inside, Eli sat exactly where they'd left him, staring blankly at the empty mug in his hands. Daniel walked over and sat down across from him, studying the boy's fragile frame. Despite everything, there was a resilience in Eli's eyes, a quiet strength that refused to give up entirely. You're stronger than you think, Eli, Daniel said suddenly, breaking the silence. I know things haven't been easy for you, but you made it this far. That says a lot about you. Eli blinked, surprised by the compliment. For the first time since they'd met, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to give Daniel hope. As the hours passed, arrangements were made for Eli to stay at the shelter temporarily, while investigations continued. Before leaving for the night, Daniel knelt beside him one last time. I'll be back tomorrow, Eli, he promised, and we'll figure this out together. You're not alone anymore. Though Eli didn't respond, his gaze lingered on Daniel as he turned to leave. In that fleeting moment, Daniel felt certain of one thing: this boy needed someone to fight for him. And Daniel was determined to be that person. Little did he know, uncovering the truth would lead him down a path far more complicated and dangerous than he ever imagined. The next morning, Officer Daniel Harper arrived at the shelter early, his mind racing with questions about Eli. The boy had been quiet but cooperative when Daniel left the previous night, though his silence still weighed heavily on Daniel's conscience. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eli's story, something darker lurking beneath the surface. When Daniel entered the common room, he found Eli sitting by the window, staring out at the gray skies. The boy looked smaller, somehow swallowed up by the oversized sweater someone at the shelter had given him. A plate of uneaten toast sat on the table in front of him, untouched. Morning, Eli, Daniel said warmly, pulling up a chair beside him. How are you holding up? Eli glanced at him briefly before returning his gaze to the window. It wasn't much of an answer, but Daniel didn't expect one. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pen, sliding them toward him. Eli, if you don't feel like talking, maybe you can draw or write something instead, Daniel suggested gently. Whatever helps you feel comfortable. Eli hesitated, his fingers brushing against the notebook. Then slowly he picked up the pen and began to sketch. At first the lines were hesitant and shaky, but as minutes passed they grew bolder. Daniel watched silently, giving Eli the space he needed. What emerged on the page was both heartbreaking and revealing. There was a crude drawing of a house, crooked and dark, with stick figures inside. One figure was much larger than the others, towering over two smaller ones. Lines radiated from the big figure, almost like cracks spreading outward. Beneath the picture, Eli scrawled a single word: scared. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Though the drawing lacked detail, its meaning was clear. Whoever lived in that house had instilled fear, not just in Eli, but possibly in others around him. That's a good start, Eli, Daniel said softly, careful not to push too hard. Can you tell me who those people are? Or what happened there? Eli froze, his hand gripping the pen tightly. For a moment it seemed like he might shut down completely, but then after a long pause he whispered, Mom, and her boyfriend. It was a breakthrough, albeit a painful one. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and steady. Did they hurt you, Eli? Eli's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded slowly, barely perceptible. His tiny frame shook as he fought back sobs, clutching the blanket around his shoulders like a shield. Daniel's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath his resolve. Abuse cases always hit close to home for him, especially involving children. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed for Eli's sake. I'm so sorry you went through that, Daniel said, his tone unwavering. But you're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Eli sniffled, wiping his face with the sleeve of his sweater. He didn't speak further, but the trust in his eyes told Daniel he believed him, at least a little. Later that day, Daniel met with Sarah and Detective Laura Mendez, a colleague experienced in child protection cases. Together, they reviewed what little information they had gathered so far. We need to locate his mother, Laura said firmly, flipping through her notes. If she's involved, or even aware of what's happening, we have to intervene immediately. Daniel agreed, but voiced his concerns. From what Eli showed me, it sounds like her boyfriend is the primary threat. If we approach her directly, we risk tipping him off. We need to be strategic. Laura nodded thoughtfully. Let's start by running a background check on the address Eli described. See if there are any records of domestic disturbances or welfare checks. In the meantime, keep building Eli's trust. He's our best source right now. As the meeting concluded, Daniel returned to the shelter, where Eli was playing quietly with some toys donated by volunteers. Watching him laugh softly at a toy car made Daniel's heart ache even more. This boy deserved joy, safety, and love, not the life he'd endured thus far. Over the next few hours, Daniel spent time with Eli, sharing stories and playing games to lighten the mood. Slowly but surely, Eli began opening up, revealing fragments of his past in bits and pieces. He spoke of nights spent hiding under the bed, of meals skipped because there wasn't enough, and of bruises explained away as accidents. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of the nightmare Eli had escaped. By evening, Daniel realized something crucial. Finding Eli wasn't just about rescuing one child, it was about exposing a system that allowed such suffering to go unnoticed. And as he tucked Eli into bed that night, promising to return tomorrow, Daniel vowed to leave no stone unturned until justice was served. What neither of them knew was that their actions would soon ignite a chain reaction throughout the town, a reckoning that would challenge everyone's assumptions about safety, accountability, and humanity itself. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Officer Daniel Harper. Armed with the fragments of Eli's story, he and Detective Laura Mendez worked tirelessly to piece together the boy's past. Their investigation led them to a run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of Maplewood. a place where hope seemed as scarce as sunlight in winter. When they arrived at the address Eli had described, the building loomed before them like a shadowy sentinel. Its peeling paint and broken windows told stories of neglect, much like the child who had escaped its walls. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped inside, bracing himself for what they might find. Apartment 3B was registered under the name of Lisa Carter, Eli's mother. After knocking several times without response, Daniel and Laura entered cautiously, their badges visible. What greeted them inside was both expected and shocking. Piles of unwashed dishes, empty liquor bottles scattered across the floor, and furniture that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. But it was the small details that struck Daniel hardest. A child's backpack lay forgotten in the corner, its contents spilled out, a crumpled worksheet dated weeks ago, a broken pencil, and a single sock. On the wall near the couch, faint marks suggested someone had tried to scrub away stains, though traces remained stubbornly visible. "Looks like no one's lived here for a while," Laura remarked, her voice grim as she surveyed the scene. "But whoever was here didn't leave willingly." Daniel nodded, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. This wasn't just negligence, it was abandonment. Wherever Lisa Carter had gone, she hadn't taken her son with her, and based on Eli's account, she hadn't protected him either. Back at the station, further digging revealed unsettling truths. Lisa Carter had a history of erratic behavior, including multiple arrests for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. Her most recent partner, identified as Marcus Kane, had an even darker record: assault charges, restraining orders, and suspected ties to illegal activities. "This guy sounds like bad news," Laura said, reviewing the file. "If he was living with Lisa and Eli, there's a good chance he's the one responsible for what happened to the boy." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We need to find them, both of them." Their search led them to a local bar where Marcus Kane was known to frequent. When they finally tracked him down, he was exactly as Daniel imagined, rough around the edges with a menacing glare that made people instinctively back away. "Where's Lisa Carter?" Daniel demanded, cutting straight to the point. Marcus sneered, leaning back against the bar counter. "What's it to you? She owes me rent money anyway. Haven't seen her in weeks." "And her son?" Laura pressed, her tone sharp. "Eli. Have you seen him?" At the mention of Eli, Marcus's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Kid's probably better off wherever he is. That mom of his ain't fit to raise nobody." Daniel exchanged a glance with Laura. Though Marcus wasn't directly admitting guilt, his dismissive attitude spoke volumes. They left the bar with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: Marcus Kane knew far more than he let on. Meanwhile, back at the shelter, Eli began showing signs of progress. With Daniel visiting daily, the boy started opening up. About his life before the dumpster. He spoke of nights when his mother locked herself in her room, leaving him alone with Marcus. Of being told he was worthless, a burden, a mistake. One evening, as Daniel sat beside Eli reading a book, the boy suddenly asked, "Am I bad?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He set the book aside and turned to face Eli, his expression softening. "No, Eli, you're not bad. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me?" Tears welled up in Eli's eyes, but for once they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe he wasn't to blame. Word of Eli's rescue began spreading through Maplewood, stirring emotions in the tight-knit community. Some residents expressed outrage, demanding justice for the boy. Others quietly donated clothes, toys, and food to the shelter, hoping to help in whatever way they could. But as Daniel delved deeper into the case, he realized the truth would shake the town to its core and force everyone to confront uncomfortable realities about how easily children could slip through the cracks. Little did anyone know, the storm was only beginning. The story of Eli's rescue spread like wildfire through Maplewood, igniting a mix of emotions among its residents. For such a small town, the news felt seismic, ripping apart the illusion of safety and forcing people to confront harsh truths about their community. Some rallied behind Officer Daniel Harper, praising him for stepping in where others had failed. Others, however, whispered quietly about whether the situation was being blown out of proportion. At the center of it all was Eli, whose fragile presence became a symbol of both hope and shame. The shelter where he stayed transformed into a hub of activity as volunteers poured in with donations and offers to help. Boxes of clothes, toys, and books piled up in corners, each item carrying a message of care from strangers who wanted to make amends, even if they didn't fully understand what had happened. But not everyone saw Eli's rescue as a victory. During a town hall meeting called to discuss the case, tensions boiled over. Parents voiced concerns about how a child could go unnoticed for so long. Teachers admitted they hadn't recognized the signs of neglect when Eli occasionally attended school. Neighbors argued over whether Lisa Carter and Marcus Kane should face criminal charges, or if the system itself was at fault for failing to intervene sooner. Daniel sat quietly in the back of the room, observing the chaos unfold. He understood. The frustration, it mirrored his own, but he also knew that pointing fingers wouldn't solve anything. What mattered now was ensuring Eli never returned to the life he'd escaped. As the debate raged on, an unexpected voice broke through the noise. Mrs. Evelyn Parks, an elderly woman known for her kindness and wisdom, stood up slowly, leaning on her cane. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "This isn't about blame. It's about responsibility. We let this boy down. Not just his mother, not just the police, but all of us. Now we have a chance to do better." Her words silenced the room, leaving many visibly shaken. Daniel nodded in agreement, grateful for her clarity. She was right. The focus needed to shift from anger to action. Outside the town hall, reporters gathered, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Headlines screamed across local newspapers, "Starving boy found in dumpster shock, small town," and "How could this happen?" The media frenzy only added fuel to the fire, turning what should have been a private healing process into a public spectacle. For Eli, the attention was overwhelming. Though he remained sheltered from the cameras and interviews, he could sense the weight of the world pressing down on him. During one particularly difficult afternoon, he retreated to a quiet corner of the shelter, clutching a stuffed bear someone had given him. Daniel found him there, curled up with his knees hugged tightly to his chest. "You okay, buddy?" Daniel asked softly, sitting beside him. Eli hesitated before shaking his head. "Everyone's talking about me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why can't they stop?" Daniel sighed, placing a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder. "They're talking because they care about you, Eli. But I promise we'll protect you from all of this. You don't have to worry." Though Eli seemed somewhat comforted by Daniel's words, the stress of the situation was undeniable. It wasn't just the town's reaction weighing on him. It was the uncertainty of his future. Would he ever see his mother again? And if he did, would she be different? Meanwhile, efforts to locate Lisa Carter intensified. Detectives traced her movements to a nearby city, where she had reportedly started a new life with yet another partner. When officers finally tracked her down, her demeanor was defensive and evasive. "I didn't abandon him," she cried during questioning, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't take care of him anymore. Marcus, he made things worse. I thought Eli would be safer without me." Her explanation rang hollow, even to herself. No matter how dire her circumstances, leaving a child to fend for himself was unforgivable. Still, Daniel couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes, a reflection of years spent trapped in cycles of abuse and despair. As Lisa faced potential charges, the town grappled with its collective guilt. Support groups formed to address issues of neglect and domestic violence, while schools implemented new training programs to identify warning signs in students. Slowly but surely, Maplewood began to heal, but the scars ran deep. For Daniel, the hardest part was knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing took time, especially for someone like Eli. Yet every day brought small victories, a smile shared between them, a laugh during playtime, or simply the knowledge that Eli was safe. And though challenges lay ahead, Daniel vowed to stand by Eli's side, for as long as it took. Weeks turned into months and the once turbulent town of Maplewood began to find its footing again. The storm that Eli's rescue had unleashed slowly gave way to a sense of renewal, a chance for the community to rebuild not just itself but also the lives shattered by neglect and silence. For Officer Daniel Harper, this journey was far from over. It wasn't just about solving a case. It was about giving Eli a future he deserved, one filled with hope, love, and stability. Eli, now thriving under the care of foster parents who adored him, began to blossom in ways no one expected. The hollow-eyed boy found scavenging in a dumpster was almost unrecognizable. His cheeks regained color, his laughter grew louder, and his eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of fear. School became a place of discovery rather than dread, thanks to teachers who went out of their way to support him. Daniel visited regularly, always bringing something small, a new book, a puzzle, or sometimes just his presence. Their bond deepened, with each visit transforming from protector and rescued into something resembling family. On one such afternoon, as they sat together building a model airplane, Eli looked up at Daniel and asked, "Will you always come see me?" The question caught Daniel off guard, but he smiled warmly. "Always," he promised. "You're stuck with me, buddy." Eli grinned, returning his focus to the plane. Though simple, the exchange meant everything. It was proof that trust could be rebuilt, even after unimaginable loss. Meanwhile, Lisa Carter's trial drew widespread attention. Her testimony revealed years of abuse at the hands of Marcus Kane, painting a picture of a woman trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. While some sympathized with her plight, others struggled to forgive her decision to leave Eli behind. In the end, she pleaded guilty to charges of child endangerment and neglect, receiving a sentence that included counseling and mandatory rehabilitation programs. Marcus Kane, on the other hand, faced harsher consequences. Investigations uncovered additional victims, leading to multiple counts of assault and exploitation. His arrest sent shockwaves through the community, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. For Daniel, justice felt bittersweet. He knew locking away criminals wouldn't erase the scars they left behind, but it was a start. More importantly, it reinforced his belief in the power of accountability and compassion. As time passed, Maplewood transformed in subtle, yet profound ways. Neighbors checked on each other more often. Teachers paid closer attention to students showing signs of distress, and conversations about mental health and domestic violence became less taboo, fostering an environment where people felt safe seeking help. One evening, during a community event held to honor local heroes, Daniel stood beside Eli as residents gathered around to express their gratitude. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and applause echoed through the park. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he kept his words simple yet heartfelt. "This isn't my story," he said, gesturing toward Eli. "It's his, and it's not just about survival. It's about resilience." Eli reminded us all that even in the darkest moments, there's light if we choose to look for it. Eli blushed at the attention, burying his face in Daniel's side. But when he finally peeked out, his smile lit up the crowd. Later that night, as fireworks painted the sky above Maplewood, Daniel knelt beside Eli and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've got a bright future ahead of you, kiddo. No matter what happens, remember you're stronger than you think." Eli nodded, his gaze fixed on the dazzling display above them. For the first time in his young life, he allowed himself to dream, not of escape but of possibilities. And as Daniel watched the boy marvel at the stars, he felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but together, they had already overcome so much. In saving Eli, Daniel realized he had saved a piece of himself too, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, humanity's capacity for kindness could shine brightest of all.